being webcast for live or subsequent broadcast via the council's YouTube site, and that you can take photographs and record, except with our confidential or exempt items. I don't think there are any, so you feel free. Apologies, Christian.
Yeah, we've received apologies from Councillor Deirdre Alden, Councillor Brown, Councillor Harmer, Councillor Clancy, and Councillor Sullivan.
Okay. Declarations of interest, any? No. The action notes of the 18th of February, can they be confirmed as true and accurate?
Agreed.
Thank you. And those on the 11th of March, similarly?
Agreed.
Thank you. And it does sound like a bit of a school thing, the scrutiny end of term report. How have we done? Is that you're going to judge us, are you? Give us points like strictly come dancing, are you?
My understanding, Chair, is that you wanted an opportunity to review
what's
worked well, what could be improved, and some options moving forward.
Professionals ever, can I just say?
If you reflect on what I said at the end of the last meeting, in the last few years, and I don't think it's anything to do with COVID, it might have been initially, but I don't think it is. We've had very few scrutiny inquiries going to full council. And I think we are not doing what we should be doing, which is those issues that are difficult, tackling those issues which are cross-departmental, tackling those issues which are the concerns of our local residents. And I asked Christian to find out the number of scrutiny inquiries being reported to full council over the last few years. We've had 2 this year. We had 2 the previous year, and I think it's been 2. Whereas when scrutiny was first established, it was 1 and sometimes 2 per month. Now, I know that austerity has meant that we've got less staff, etc., so we can't do those in-depth as many as we could, but I think we could do more than 2 a year is what I'm saying. And so I was chatting with Christian about the resource issue, and yes, we should be demanding more scrutiny officer resources from the executive, and I think we've got 1 starting on Monday, and we've got another 1 starting in the near future, so that should cover to some extent the staffing issue. But I still think that the structure of the committees, etc., I just wanted us to reflect on it to see if we could free up some officer time and create a more dynamic scrutiny process that allowed us to do more in-depth inquiries to full council. So that's where I am. And chatting with Christian, the 2 things that we could do, 1 was reduce the number of committees and establish short life task and finish that would be geared solely towards producing those cross-cutting reports to full council, or we could reduce the frequency of some of our scrutiny committees. I know some of them are busier than others, but that was the 2 basic options, and there may be others that you as colleagues may have. So that's all I wanted to say as a way of introduction.
Okay, well, this is scrutiny, it's not supposed to be political, so I'll try and steer around that. I think the thing is that we're the biggest council in Europe, so we like to keep saying. I think that the scrutiny is really important. I think it shows you how much we all rate scrutiny, and thank you very much for holding this meeting, Carl, because quite a few scrutinies haven't been held in April, and you've held it, and we've all turned up here today. We're all believers in scrutiny. And I think that, I think its heyday scrutiny used to have about 30 staff, didn't it? It was massive, and it did a real good job of not only holding the executive to account, or the administration to account, but it also ran many things. And I'm a bit disappointed to hear that we're talking about reducing things down to try and get more. I think that there's been a lot of mention of austerity now, of late, things have changed in that direction. I think the leader himself has gone as far to say that the books are in the best condition that they've been in for 30 years or something like that, golden decade ahead of us. And I think that, I know he wouldn't say that just for political reasons. I'm sure he'd just be saying that because he really meant it. And I think that there's, I would probably like to see that there would be an expansion of scrutiny, being able to do more things without actually saying we're going to have to cut something to try and do it. I wouldn't like to draw an officer into this conversation, but I would think if we were to look at if we had someone here who was, say, just talking openly as an advisor who'd been to other councils, they may be surprised to find that the largest council in Europe has such a small scrutiny. And so basically what I'm saying is that I'm all for expansion of scrutiny, but I'm a bit uneasy if it comes at the reduction of other things, is what I would say. It probably took a long time to say it, but that's it.
Okay. Well, I know I want to get a consensus of any recommendations that we make. I'm not going to have a vote. If we can't get a consensus, then the status quo will apply. That's how I approach these things, because I think scrutiny isn't a political tool. It is a tool to improve services for the people we all serve, and to do that, we've got to have a consensus as to how we proceed. So,
Could I just come in?
Yeah.
Respond quickly to Councillor. Now, this is I've just had a quick look at the annual survey from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, recognising that Birmingham is a very different local authority to most local authorities in the country. Just to put it in some context, and it has been a declining officer resource across scrutiny for probably 10, 15 years. The average number of dedicated scrutiny officers per authority 2021 was 1.1. So just to put it in a bit of context in terms of where we are, if you look at our structure at the moment, we've got...
we only have one officer.
Yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there. We are a very different local authority.
How many have we got?
So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, give or take, because they're not all.
But we need to make a meaningful comparison with other, big Met authorities. I think, because sorry, I'll shut up. But I'm quite exercised about this, which is why I've turned off.
Yeah, no, I did caveat it at the beginning, saying this is across the country with some very small authorities in that. But it is a small number.
But we're not the worst authority in terms of staff ratio in scrutiny, is what I think you're saying. Yeah.
I think it's difficult to pro-rata things. I was reading just something the other night. It was a by-election the other night, and it was a major sort of ward, and someone got in and you notice that they polled 257 votes. You know what I mean? And these are the differences that you cite when you scale it up. And they're still doing equally good things. I'm not trying to say that small is not as good, but it just shows you the differences that if you've got wards, 257 people are voting, you're probably only going to have one scrutiny officer, I would have thought.
Do we all accept the premise that we would like to see more scrutiny, in-depth scrutiny inquiries being reported to full council? Because that's
not if it comes with some of what you've just said, because I don't see I've got a fundamentally different interpretation of what's happened here since this scrutiny function was set up in 2001. And I just think that I feel that that the role of backbench members, which is what we are all essentially, has been absolutely diminished by executive and scrutiny. I was a county councillor in 25 years ago. I chaired a committee on transport. I thought I had a much more significant policy role there, even as a very new, novice councillor then. And I just think that some of the things that we've just talked about would, for me, make it, make the role of scrutiny even less, significant, and actually give fewer opportunities, to all backbench councillors, but particularly the opposition councillors, to have a role. But I mean, I've got a series of things that I wanted to say, so I don't want to, launch into it now. But
you don't want to say it now?
Well, I'll say yes. I mean, I don't know whether you finished.
No, go ahead. Let's go.
Well. I think, as I mentioned to you yesterday, Carl, one of my neighbours is a former head of scrutiny, I think, who was around in the early 2000s when we were setting up this structure in Birmingham, and we've gone through very generously resourced scrutiny function at the beginning of the 2000s through that phase where we reduced down to 5 committees following the Kerslake recommendations. That didn't work very well. When I first joined this council as a councillor, on the the committee that I was on had a massive brief covering economy, skills, transport, flooding, all of those things. It was unworkable. And following that, we had the review led by John Cotton of what's going to be functional for scrutiny. And we came back to this structure, of 7 thematic committees and an overarching committee, which I think, the conception of that was, I assume, to be more like, the liaison committee in the House of Commons. But I've just, last night and this morning, looked through, the remits of all the committees, and they're still absolutely massive. This committee, for example, has got in its terms of reference, scrutiny of regional working and partnerships, which I don't think is featured at all really on our work programme while I've been on it over the last 4 years. And that's not a criticism, because we've done lots of other really crucial stuff. To me, we haven't really talked enough about organisational development in the council. We've gone through a massive, change, transformation programme initiated by Chris Naylor, which we're now following through. Are we scrutinising that? Are we convinced that what we've got now is better than what we had before? I go to my own committee and some of the other committees, and if you were really starting from the premise that you wanted to reduce the number of committees, I'd suggest that what you could do is merge the committee that I've chaired for the last 4 years and economy and skills, but that would take you back to the same problem that we had pre-2018, that's an unworkable remit. Or you could look at merging the Children's Committee with what's now the committee that's looking at culture and the Commonwealth Games. But to me, that would be underselling all of those areas. So I think that we've got to address the fundamental issue of resourcing, and particularly research capacity, if we're going to do more inquiries. And because even if we set up lots of short-term task and finish groups, they would still need to be supported by somebody. Because if I'd like, in the next term of the council, someone needs to do an inquiry on our response to the climate emergency, and that will require quite a lot of dedicated and quite skilled people to do the research, because a lot of the issues are quite technical. And my experience in the last 4 years is trying to get information out about that is been quite difficult, because the staff that are working for it, not just in scrutiny but in the service departments, are already overburdened because of the level of staff cuts that this council has gone through. So I think that we need to start from a dialogue with the executive, about how seriously they're taking some of the principles that are written into the executive and scrutiny protocol. Because before the pandemic, there was the piece of work that arose from the it was the piece of peer challenge work. I can't remember the body that did it, but somebody came in and looked at the effectiveness of our scrutiny and made some recommendations. And then we had a number of meetings with the executive. Help me on is it the Centre for Public Scrutiny? So we were looking at the scrutiny protocol and the executive's attitudes to scrutiny, because one of the things that's deterred me in the last couple of years from doing major scrutiny inquiries is the really fairly, I'm going to choose my words carefully, modest response to the plastic-free Birmingham inquiry, where I would say that in response to that inquiry, well, very little at all has happened, and it's become actually a source of embarrassment to do the tracking, because it's been really impossible to get information and reports are always late. And that's a shame, because we've gone out, really engaged with a lot of stakeholders in the city and tried to make scrutiny into that function that's of interest to citizens and campaign groups. We came up with what was, I think, a really good report, with a vast amount of work put into it by the officers, and a great set of recommendations. Lots of them weren't approved by the executive, and the rest of them really, there hasn't been the capacity to move forward on them. I suppose I should be more nuanced, because we also did an inquiry on the 2018 floods, which had a lot of recommendations about emergency planning, and I feel that the response to that actually, was very constructive, and a lot of major changes were made. So I just think that I would have started the discussion in a different place, and I thought in this sort of discussion we should go through and look at what are the remits of the separate committees. The Resources Committee, to me, is an absolutely fundamental committee, and in looking forward into the next term of the council, I think there are going to be some major questions about value for money from what we have invested in the Commonwealth Games, and that's going to be an ongoing concern across lots of committees, but I think particularly financially. So I just would welcome some consideration of how we look at the remits of all the committees. And I certainly wouldn't start from a position of trying to reduce the number of committees or how often they meet. I mean, I think there is a political challenge for us, because I've chaired a committee where I've had over the 4 years, a number of people who simply just did not attend. And that's a whipping issue in the groups. But I think if you've got committees where you've only got 8 members and somebody consistently doesn't attend, then we've got to do something about that as political groups. Because then I think it does make it difficult to have good discussions and a good level of scrutiny and policy development if you haven't got a consistent attendance. So I'd be constantly dealing with somebody who wasn't there really at all, and other people whose attendance was really sporadic. So I think we need to work on maybe the way that we have whipping arrangements, also, but people who put themselves forward to be councillors need to understand what the expectations are of being a councillor. That you are going to be a fantastic advocate for your local residents, but you are going to take part in the corporate governance and the business of the council as well. Sorry, I've gone on at length there, but I do feel that over the 4 years that I would have drawn some different conclusions to what you just talked about at the beginning, Carl.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I agree with the number of scrutiny committees. One, it'll give the officers more chance of actually digging in. And on task and finish, resources did task and finish on procurements, and I think that's been absolutely fabulous contribution once it gets implemented next year. And I think what Liz said about attendance is a key. When people have got to be committed, some of the political groups have given them the option what skills they've got and what scrutiny committee they want to go on. So they've got the relevant skills. That was fantastic, but you've got to attend to make an impact. And for somebody very minimal attendance or non-attendance throughout the whole of the year. I've had that in my scrutiny committee. And
well, you've only got to look at today. I know it's election time, but
yeah,
attendance at cohort hasn't been good, has it, throughout the year?
No.
And from our side, they're all chairs, and you would have expected them to be that little bit extra committed, wouldn't you?
And not only attendance, the contributions when you're actually there in the scrutiny committee. I think it's really, really important. I don't think there's enough councillors actually reading the papers before they come to the scrutiny, and they're just looking at each other. Oh, where are these questions coming in? But if everybody had read their papers, they would know what questions to ask. And I've held 4 years scrutiny committees, and I've had members from all political groups just come in, sit there for 2.5 hours, not say a word, and then just leave. And that is poor, to be honest with you. And as far as the task and finish goes, Carl, I think because there's a lot of crossover, the work that the scrutinies do, I think Liz briefly mentioned it, the crossover, and then you've got to make a decision about which scrutiny committee does that fall under. I think since we've reduced, and I know we've increased it slightly, but I think there's still a lot of crossovers between scrutinies and the work, and we have to decide, well, who does that go to? So I'm all for the task and finish groups, and I think it's really, really important. So everybody's aware that we have more scrutiny reports, task and finish going to full council. That's got to be a definite.
But there's no point doing the reports for the sake of them, because if we don't get a response from the executive, then we've done something which is just a source of frustration.
I have to say, every scrutiny report that I've been involved with over since its inception has really made a difference. And I look back to first one we did was why we lost the City of Culture bid back in the 90s. Then we did swimming. Then we did street prostitution and problem debt. And the last two that this committee's done in the last 2 years was customer services, which I think has certainly in housing has made a massive difference, and hopefully in planning will we've certainly stirred them up and got them to think about their attitude towards enforcement more than they have been in recent years. I still think there's a lot to do around that area. Exempt accommodation, I think, we've got a select committee, we've got a government committed to changes. I think it's very positive. Anyway, the thing I would say about short life task and finish, if you can choose from across the backbench structure of the council, you can choose people who have got a particular interest in a particular issue. I know the one I always point to, street prostitution. It doesn't affect every ward in the city. No. It was Edgbaston, Ladywood and one or two others, and we got the membership from those wards, and everybody put 110% in because it really, really mattered to their ward. And if you'd have had somebody from a standing committee where it wasn't their issue, you could understand how what's the problem with this, because it doesn't affect their day-to-day residents, their lives of their residents. So, Kate, you haven't spoken, and then I was
going to say, and it cuts across the committees as well. I think so. Having sat on the other side of things as a cabinet member, the children's overview and scrutiny in the years that I was a cabinet member was exemplary. I mean, it was just so well chaired, and the huge majority of the members arrived having read their papers, they'd done their homework, they were well prepared, with really probing questions. So really good scrutiny is a positive asset for the cabinet member.
Yeah.
Because it keeps the focus. And then other areas I've seen have been where people kind of have been quite up to date. Perhaps the chair hasn't been quite as on the ball. So scrutiny is so very important. And as Liz says, it has gone from being a really, really well financed and staffed department to being almost a shadow of what it was. And I think it is a loss to the people of this city in that respect.
Yeah. I mean, I had a choice of, the leader wanted me to stay in the cabinet, and I much prefer scrutiny because you can cabinet, you're reactive, whereas with scrutiny you can look at those issues which are perhaps more challenging, and you can make more of a difference. That's my view. I always like to have challenging roles. Not that the cabinet isn't a very challenging role.
In scrutiny, there is a degree of choice, isn't there?
Yeah.
You look at things and you can stand on the outside and
you can
perceive.
And you're unlikely to be captured by the officers.
When you're inside it as the cabinet member, you are, as you say, you
Well, look,
I'm
yes, sorry, Ewan, and then I'll.
Yeah, I mean, I love brainstorming and just listening to everyone talking there. I just picked up some points. There's certainly from a lot of things that Liz said. I mean, I think I went on an LGA course once and they covered scrutiny, and scrutiny was based around select committees, what I mean? And I get the impression, I mean, certainly in the early doors, I think or certainly when the leader came to scrutiny, we used to beat him up a bit, even his own people, just because you can. And plus as well, it's what the whole point of scrutiny, isn't it? I do feel sometimes that, the leader or deputy leader or whoever comes in, and I just feel the unbroken sweat in some of the meetings, just come in, read off their report and walk out the door. And I just feel if you're going to be a committee holding someone to account, you really should make them dig deep a bit and sort of, because, it's only when you move people out, or yourself as a councillor, move yourself out of your comfort zone, I think you get effective, because you're just cruising along the whole time. But I think you do a good example there, Carl, because you're committed. So you can talk about all the reports that you've done, and you can still hear the passion in you now about those things that you did, and you really care. And I think we're all here in this room today because it's all about the residents, and that's the reason why we've turned up here today. And I think that you've enacted that. I'd have to go and do some research, but at times there's come through, there have been quite a few number of scrutiny reports that have come to full council, they've been accepted, and then what's happened to them?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. And sometimes the council will just carry on doing what it was doing, even though there's, the council voted for the administration to change, and they just ignore it. And I think, well, that is wrong, isn't it? Just picking up some of the points. I think coming on to scrutiny, if you take part and do it, it is actually amazingly rewarding.
Yeah.
The the exempt accommodation one, that was cross-party. I think when you're doing cross-party stuff, you actually realise that's the stuff that you really get a kick out of being a council, actually, because you're all working together to get something done for the common good. You might sometimes agree about the flavour, and it's when you get to the edges of something you generally disagree. But when you're in the centre of something, everyone's pretty much agreed, and we're all here at the same time. I think you made a good point at the Commonwealth Games, because one thing I would like to have a look at is that I read in a report, or it was an answer to full questions, that there was an answer that pavement repairs and things like that in certain wards have been put back because there's resources are being put on the being put forward towards the Commonwealth Games, because obviously Keir have only got so much, it's economies of scale, isn't it, or opportunity cost. If they're working around the Commonwealth Games, they haven't others. I've got a road they've been on. I've had Keir out 3 times and walked it, and they walked it and said it was perfect. 48 hours later, a 70-year-old woman trips over, which they say was a trip hazard. It should have been repaired, and dislocated her shoulder and had to go to hospital. And I think this is the sort of thing that scrutiny should be looking into. That did the Commonwealth Games cause that, or was that just these things happen? So that's why I haven't gone rushing to the press or anything. I'm just really interested. Yeah. We should have a look at it. I think attendance is a really big thing. I think that people should attend, because if you've looking to go on through, if you've got aspirations as a councillor, if you arrive in cabinet, right, having never taken part properly in scrutiny, you're going to be found out very quickly. Certainly from an opposition point of view, because, we just get given that whole pack, and we've got some support, but not sort of massive officer support. So we've got to read through it. You've got to look at that. And then you've got to hold the administration to account. And if you get that wrong, Ian takes you apart, because obviously that's the whole object. Now, we're obviously asking searching questions, but you can't get to that sort of level if you haven't turned up to scrutiny and learnt the ropes. It's like sort of being a footballer and just suddenly arriving at the Premier League level. You're going to be found out very quickly. So it's in your own interest, not only the residents' interest, to take part. And my final point is that you get good and bad chairs. For me, a chair is someone who's a facilitator. You know what I mean? And I think you're a good example of that, Carl. You have your passions, but you let everyone speak. Right. The will of the committee goes forward, and you're to bring out the skills of everyone in that meeting to get forward, everyone working together, operating at their maximum revs to get something. You go to some scrutinies, and the chair themselves think that they're the one who should be driving it, and they're the ones who are telling everyone what to think, and you can see it when you do a call-in. Sometimes, you can be doing a call-in, and this is like a slam dunk, because, to me, and you've won the argument, but you can see fine well that the chair's not having this. What I mean? And you're just thinking, well, but the scrutiny is not really supposed to be political. A call-in is there to save the council from doing itself wrong. You know what I mean? Because because a couple of call-ins we didn't win, there was then a rail crash at the end of it, which was a really bad headline for the administration. If they'd allowed the call-in to go through, okay, it might have been a soft headline hidden on page 16 of the Birmingham Mail, but they didn't do anything about it, and it's front page 3 months later. So scrutiny actually is a friend of the council, but they don't always look at it that way. So thank you, Colin.
Okay. Sorry, Christian, you wanted to come in on some of the points.
Yeah, no, thank you. And obviously I've been in post for 6 months, and it's really interesting this morning hearing, your experiences. Part of my role is to make sure that some of these issues, or many of these issues if possible, can be picked up and addressed. And I think for me, a lot of what's been said this morning doesn't actually possibly require constitutional change. So there's ways of working. And for example, for me, developing a really sound work programme that picks up all the different types of scrutiny activity there is fundamental to a good scrutiny function. And I think, the role of the coordinating committee is part of that. It's already part of that in terms of the constitution. And I think there's some things in there about how the chairs work with the deputy chairs and all that, which doesn't require constitutional change. It's stuff that we can do. I think, reflecting on some of the comments as well, the importance is about building relationships. And I think for me, my role as statutory scrutiny officer is scrutiny support needs to come from obviously the scrutiny team, but also there should be support from scrutiny from across the organisation. And if that's not happening in particular areas, we need to look at that and understand what the issues are, what the challenges are, what can we do to address that? Because ultimately, yeah, I've worked in lots of places and you will get differences of opinion with different parts of, the added value. We need to demonstrate and we need to come up with ways to make sure that what scrutiny wants to take forward adds value to the organisation. And we need to, sort of, if you like, business case that. And I think there's a role for the coordinating committee to do that, to make sure that, if you like, the limited resources that we do have are being put in the best possible place so we can show that added value. Interesting discussion. There's so you're aware there's a sort of a redevelopment of the West Midlands Scrutiny Network. It's initially going to be a mainly officer focused, but in time, and there will be opportunities for members to be involved in that, which I think will be a good thing. One of the things that sort of came up through that was really about the focus on issues, not necessarily governance structures or how those things are done. So you could cut this cake in many different ways. You could have 30 committees, you could have 2. That work programme and the way of scrutiny can still be done in the same way. So I think my reflections of being involved in scrutiny for 20 years would be, don't get too bogged down on the actual structures of scrutiny. Get about the things that you can have control over. You don't need any sort of structure to look at. Just a sort of initial thought. I've mentioned the thing about the work programme. I think that's absolutely fundamentally key. And there's lots of different ways, as you know, and you've mentioned this morning, of doing scrutiny, whether that be inquiry work that takes, 6 months or possibly longer. There's single pieces of work that come to scrutiny. Whatever, they need to be really well scoped. Now, if it's a single report, if it's a single piece of work that's taken over 2 or 3 meetings, having clarity on what the outcome is and what you want to get out of it is key. And I think there's a role there for the chairs to be working with the deputy chairs, find consensus from cross-party. I think that's fundamental to me. And I just think some of the things that we need to sort of look at is just the structuring of work through the year. I think I think some of the issues that we've had recently, because of the workload and because of the resource that we've got, is that we've come to conclusions all at the same time, or the final report's been written all at the same time. So I think, again, there's a role, whatever structure's in place, to thinking about that and making sure that we can best support you. And that might be thinking about what's a priority now in terms of timeline, what's a priority, but it doesn't matter if it happens now or in 6 months' time. So I think my reflection is that there's lots that can be done or tweaked without constitutional changes. And I guess ultimately for me, given what I've just said, I think there is an issue around resource. I think this morning, if you do want to do more inquiry work and in-depth work, yes, I will do my absolute best to get that support from across the organisation. However, the recognition is that if you continue meeting on a sort of 4 weekly basis, that capacity you have to support that inquiry work won't be as large. So it's just sort of my initial reaction to this morning's discussion.
Okay, all right. Liz.
Well, I agree. There's no point doing constitutional amendments for the sake of it. And I absolutely agree with you, Christian, that any sort of best practice recommendation would be to look at what are the strategic priorities of the council in its business plan and budget, and look at things that are coming up in the forward plan and make sure that your work plan for each committee is coherent with that. But I think that we should start any discussion that we have about scrutiny ought to look at the existing scope of the committees. So a problem for me at the moment, given that I'm chairing a committee and have done for 4 years that's looking at sustainability, is that waste management falls within housing and neighbourhoods. And in that committee, I think there was a failure to understand the implications of what was going on in waste management for the commitments that we have made in our Route to Zero action plan to tackle the climate emergency. So I've been in attempting to scrutinise and challenge on the way that we're handling the reprocurement of our waste disposal on a committee that actually doesn't have a remit for it since early 2020. And I didn't get any information about what was happening. So at that point, I was reacting very much on at the last minute on a renegotiation process that had already gone wrong. But I feel that the council's actually taking the wrong policy direction there, and almost that the way that the committee remits were set up actually made it impossible for us to intervene and do pre-scrutiny in a way that would have been meaningful. So we need to be aware of what we've already got in the constitution, and I absolutely acknowledge that the importance of the supported accommodation inquiry. It's had national impact. I think it's prompted all sorts of reflection and action, from government and regionally. And I think, really significant piece of work. So congratulations, Carl, for championing that. But I think that the fact that it came to this committee, which technically wasn't, it's not part of the remit of this committee, has meant that other things, have not been looked at in this committee, like the regional things or the organisational development things. So I think we just need to, be flexible, but understand what we've already got in the constitutional documents. And I come back to the issue about the relationship with the executive. I mean, I feel I've got a really good working relationship, with the cabinet member, for transport and environment, with all the cabinet members. And I've heard Deborah Cadman come and talk to our ONS committee about her commitment to scrutiny. But I think that the fundamental problem in the service directorates is that we've got so few staff left that a lot of them cannot, have not got the time or the energy left to engage with scrutiny in a meaningful way. So, for example, the cabinet member, for street scene and parks, who I believe I've got, a good working relationship with, has come to my committee and this committee for several years running, saying that that the middle management structure will be repopulated in waste and recycling, and that we'll sort out some of both the service failures that we've talked about in our customer service inquiry and some of the issues that have arisen in relation to the waste reprocurement. But that recruitment is taking so long that there is nobody there who can actually engage in a policy dialogue with the scrutiny committee. So sorry, I mean, I'm engaging in a long rant about this. I'm getting quite a lot of stuff off my chest from the 4 years, but I do think that it's important, and that unless we've got people to talk to and who actually want to engage with us and supply information when we ask for it, on major things like the response to climate change, it makes effective scrutiny pretty difficult.
Yep. Well, I think in the early days. Sorry, you indicated.
Just a quick one. I know Christian's mentioned about the relationship between the chairs and the vice chairs, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. All the years that I've been the chair, the best year was when the vice chair was a Tory, and we worked together. We had pre-meetings before our full scrutiny meetings, and holding the executive to account. And I know this has been going on, and it's not up to the scrutiny to decide. I still think 50% of scrutiny should be from the opposition, whoever the opposition is, because it's all about holding the executive to account.
Should be proportionate.
At least proportional.
Yeah.
Sorry for dropping that one in, but I feel strongly about it. So
I could be supportive to you. John Cotton did a report at the end of last year, at the end of this time 4 years ago.
2017-18.
Scrutiny voted on it, and it was in there. And I don't think any of it's been implemented. It was done, filed beautifully. I'm sure it was bound, and it was put on a shelf somewhere. And I don't think it's ever come down since.
Historically, the Labour group has always had a debate about proportionality. As you know, when you lot were in power, when there was a Conservative Liberal Democrat alliance, euphemistically called you lot. No, my opposition. My
mask slipped.
I couldn't possibly say because I worked for the council at that point. Obviously.
It was done on a proportionate basis, but within the controlling coalition. When we were at that time, we were in favour of.
When we had the coalition running the council, all the chairs were Tory or Lib Dem, and I actually know.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. Yeah, from within the controlling coalition.
Okay, sorry.
That's what I said. And our policy was to have proportionality. Then when it came to when we took back control in 2012, I can remember the debate because I stood up, and I think Albert stood up, and I think Ian stood up and said, this is what we should do. But it was defeated within the group. So, and we all know the reasons why. I'm not going to rehearse them. That's why we need to get a consensus. It's no good us making a recommendation because it won't mean a thing. We've got to get a consensus between not just the leaders of the respective groups, but get a culture across all. And I think that is more likely if we have less standing committees and more task and finish where it's short life, it's not permanent. That's my view. obviously, I sense the feeling from the meeting that that's not going to happen today. So what I was going to suggest was, we've got an all-out election. Who knows what's going to happen? I think we should leave it to the next generation of coordination and scrutiny chairs to reflect more fully and over a longer period of time all these issues that we've wrestled with today. And there's no way, in 45 minutes we can come up with a coherent set of proposals that will be lasting. So I think we should just simply pass the baton on to the next generation of councillors. That's my view.
I think my view is that, I mean, certainly within our group, I mean, you mentioned when the Conservatives last ran the council together with the Liberal Democrats, that was longer of a way than I would like it to be, shall we say. So we're going back some years now.
10 years?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, isn't it? And I think that I think some of the things we say to our group is just because the other lot did it, don't do it yourself, because it'll just perpetuate. It becomes one of those things and you don't go anywhere. And so some of the things that we've had votes in full council where we've supported what you wanted to do, just because sometimes someone's got to draw a line in the sand and say we're going to move on. I think that it could be worth that if there is going to be an agreement on proportionality or anything like that, I think the time that that's to be done, it's going to be tight, would be this side of the election, because at the minute no one knows what's going to happen. The other side of election, if something comes out and someone's got a thumping great big majority or something like that, there's no real need for them to do anything. But at this moment in time, no one knows what's going to happen in May. You know what I mean? And so if the leaders were to sit down and decide upon something, something may happen. I'm not the leader, so I can't.
No. Well,
but I think that both leaders, sort of outside the political Punch and Judy, are generally fairly reasonable individuals that you can sit and talk to. I've spoken to Ian about things that are not contentious, and he said to me, you've persuaded me. Okay, I'll change my mind. I'll do that. No major bit of policy or anything like that, but just little bits on the edges. So if they were to sit down, they may come to an agreement. It's just about trust at the end of the day, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Liz, you wanted to come back.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the last couple of years, I've really regretted that colleagues in the Conservative group didn't take on the vice chairs, because really on my committee, probably the most expert contributor is always Councillor Huxtable, who's a former cabinet member and has huge expertise on all the matters in the committee's remit, and I'm really been extremely grateful for his excellent ongoing contribution, and he's been like me on that committee for the 4 years, but because of the difference of the disagreements about proportionality and chairing arrangements, he's never formally taken the vice chair, but for me he has always seemed to be the de facto vice chair. Or and I've got other excellent colleagues who have been the vice chairs, but probably haven't had the same input that he has, and but I do feel it is undemocratic not to have proportional chairing arrangements. But I just think that we would have to, obviously people can't commit future generations of councillors, but we'd have to have a consensus that would be the norm from now on. Because, that's because there is an element of sort of bearing a grudge about what happened from 2004 to 2012. However small-minded that is, but that's what it is.
Well, I always say.
Could I answer what Liz's point though? Because just to agree, did his report, which talks about proportional chairs or chairs going some level of that. Then that was then disregarded when it came to the next administration or whatever, after the 2018 election. But then it was in return, it was going to say, we'll have, Conservative vice chairs, which to us was just a way of so that council could say, look, we're being cross-party, but really it was nothing of the sort. All the authority is going to be in our group, and we'll just give you these token things to make it look good. And we said, well, we're not going to take part in an issue that we felt was actually was painting a picture that wasn't.
We would have probably done the same. I think.
I think you probably would have done it.
I forgot what I was going to say now. It's all right. Liz what were you talking about, Liz? Yes. The point I was going to make was short life task and finish. Even though I was a Labour member in opposition, I was invited by the then chair of COORD, Mick Wilkes, a Liberal Democrat, to chair one on problem debt. And when I reported to full council, 6 months after it had been established. I reminded him that I was the only opposition councillor who'd been invited to chair one of these committees. I think he set up 3 or 4, and all the others were from the coalition. And after the meeting, he came up to me and he said, "I wish you had reminded members, because I got a lot of criticism for doing just that." So it isn't just the Labour group that struggles with.
That's leadership, though, isn't it? It's for the leader.
Well, and that's why it's more likely if it's in the gift of the chair of co-ord, who chairs the short life task and finish. I was going to suggest that it should be whoever chairs the coordinating committee. You're more likely to get, good choices than if it's left to the whims of respective groups. But look, I don't want to pursue this because it's clearly we need more. I think we all need more time to reflect on it, and so that's why I suggested that we pass that baton on to our colleagues post-election. That's the only thing I think we can make progress, because we're not going to get a consensus today, and even if we did, whoever's looking at this meeting would say, well, you've got, a fraction of the members here. It's not representative.
They're
of,
Liberal Democrats.
so it's.
I was going to make that transparency point, because I think if you're going to make any sort of major changes to, even if it's not constitutional changes, but changes to way of working, for transparency's sake, it needs to be written down and shared with everybody, because otherwise it's going to come across as a further watering down of the role of the rank and file councillors. Or that's how I feel.
But it would be a constitutional change. So it wouldn't just be done through.
Just if you came to this meeting, when I looked at the papers last night, I just thought there's the excerpt from the Constitution, there's the end of Kristen's useful an overview of the year, and the business report from the last meeting, but there was nothing really to suggest the scope of the discussion today. And I just it's not as though we don't have task and finish groups at the moment. So I can think, so we've had some really good ones. We've had one on tree policy where leading role was played by opposition councillors like Debbie Clancy. We've had a task and finish group on what members wanted to see out of the new highways contract with Kia, and the climate change advisory group, the Route to Zero advisory group, is effectively a task and finish group on the response to climate change. And it illustrates your point that that has got a membership which has been almost self-selecting. It's the people who've got a passion about working on the response to climate change.
So what you're saying is the Constitution allows us to do it anyway.
But I don't know whether we'd want to circumscribe it to always being at the direction of the chair of overview and scrutiny, because I think there are certain matters where the cabinet member might quite legitimately want to invite a group of members to do some task and finish work, or a short piece of essentially research work on an issue, because I think that was the genesis of the tree policy work.
Yes, someone's got to make a decision. Well, there has to be a process for making a decision. That doesn't mean to say, if it was me, I would be taking into account all those things before choosing. That's what I would hope any future chair of co-ord would do, is not just say, well, I want that person. It would be the best person for the job, taking into account all the issues that you raised.
Actually, I agree with a lot of what you say. The one thing about the cabinet member, we'll just park politics, but when you sit at cabinet, time and time again, there's a purchasing decision is rolling over because purchasing didn't have enough time to look into it. So there's contracts that haven't.
It drives me mad.
It hasn't been. There's stuff in this council that I went all the way back through it, and Ian was looking at me, and then I saw the penny drop, because the last time it went out to procurement was when Ian was doing it before he was leader. And some of the stuff goes that far back. And when I said, look, there really needs to be a scrutiny looking at how we do purchasing.
That's either laziness or incompetence.
Well, yes. Now, obviously, I'll leave it for you to come up with which one you want to go for, but it's certainly not professionalism, is it? And when I said that, but then the response I got back from everyone in the cabinet was, "I'm sorry, with the administration, we're not allowed to get involved with scrutiny. You're going to have to take it up with the scrutiny chair." So that's why it should be the chair of scrutiny makes a decision who it is. And anyway, if you're holding the cabinet member to account, this is for me, and probably with my opposition voice on now, the last person you want is to, you don't want the cabinet member to be choosing the individual who may possibly be asking some awkward questions, but that's a one for debate.
I go back to what Kate said, that a good cabinet member would see scrutiny as a tool. And if you've got a difficult issue, and I'm thinking of special needs education, where people are very suspicious of the executive in terms of the decision making, getting the independence of scrutiny to look at an issue gives it more credibility to those people affected by those decisions. And as a cabinet member, that's something that you would hope that they would. It's not just how the decision's made, it's who's party to those decisions, and are they listening to the people affected by those decisions? And that's the trouble with executives across time, is that they don't always listen to the people affected by their decisions. And the quote I always use in speeches is, the higher up the hierarchy you go, the less contact you have with the people affected by your decisions. And that's a fact. And that's where scrutiny should always try and get that contact between decision maker and people affected by it. That's our part of our role, I think. Anyway, so look, I propose that we park this and pass the baton. What is there a form of words that you would think we could best use for this, Christian? You're the expert.
Yeah, I
on
mean,
words.
I think we can, you know, the notes from this morning will reflect the discussion, and I think what I'm hearing is that you'd like the incoming coordinating committee to look at you know, structures and working practices in the context of what's already in place,
Sure.
to make improvements and to ensure that.
Yeah. And also bearing in mind that your position, you're an interim, will be advertised in the near future. So it may be that could be one of the first tasks of the new incumbent, is to support that process. So yeah. Should Christian and I come up with a form of words and circulate it to see that you're happy with it? And you know, hopefully we'll choose our words carefully and get a consensus.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I think was you know, circulating, has kind of been picked up this morning in the edges, is just the importance of work around sort of equalities and route to zero. And I think, just to reassure you on those 2 points, you know, we've got a new member of staff starting on Monday. One of the first things I've asked her to do is to look at that, and to how we can make that sort of business as usual for whatever scrutiny activity we're doing. What that looks like at this stage, who knows? But we'd be hoping to be able to share something with members on that in the near future. So that's something that doesn't require any constitutional change. That's something that we'll just get on and do, and we can amend that to reflect whatever the new sort of arrangements are.
Okay, thank you. Can we just go back to the action note, because there's something. I had a meeting with residents who were involved in giving evidence to the exempt accommodation inquiry, and they were disappointed that one of our recommendations, which was for a review of planning enforcement practices and policies, hasn't been carried out. If you remember, the relevant committee interviewed Ian and interviewed James Wagstaff, the head of planning, and they left it at that. They're not doing an in-depth inquiry. And I'm just wondering whether you, like me, would like to see a little bit more work done around planning enforcement, because it is a key issue in my ward with HMOs, etc. And you know, it's when there's minor indiscretions, they always let them go. They never ever challenge the whoever's carrying out, and that culture of, oh well, we can get away with that because they never enforce whatever has been agreed. And I just wonder whether I don't want to prescribe the review, but I just think we need to look at practices and procedures in planning enforcement, and whether you would like us to go back to the relevant committee and ask them to carry out the recommendation to the full. Liz, and then you.
My question on that can because I'm looking at the constitution, going back to my banging on about what are the remits of the existing committees, and my assumption would be that the relevant committee is economy and skills, because it's got some remit to look at land use planning, and they've had a session already, and then I'd want to ask the chair of the colleague who's the chair of the committee, what she felt came out of that session and whether it's pointful. Because again, from my own experience, I had delegated to me as chair of sustainability and transport from the Route to Zero task force, the job of pursuing the West Midlands Pension Fund and challenging it on its response to climate change and how it's investing. And we had a long meeting with them, and they brought a load of evidence. But what they mainly said to us was, that it's very difficult, to actually, make any meaningful changes in our investment portfolio. We've got to think about the needs, of the beneficiaries, and they more or less, so that they were set on a path of their own. Climate change commitments, and they weren't able to respond to us. And so therefore, it didn't seem to me that a longer engagement with them more at the moment would be particularly pointful. So I think you've got to leave some discretion to the chair of the committee for them to decide how it fits with their work programme, and whether the dialogue that they're having is meaningful.
Just where you're saying that, just to be clear, understanding planning enforcement, existing practices, enforcement policies and procedures was considered by Economy Skills on the 2nd of March. I don't in front of me right now know what the outcome of that session was, but
that's what I'm saying. But I trust the discretion or the judgment of the chair and the committee to decide whether whether there's how much they got out of that and whether they're going to follow it up. And I think I'm not saying they shouldn't do it, but I just think sometimes it's necessary to to explain to residents that some of it may not be possible to do some of the things that were in those recommendations.
I think that it raises a point that, for me anyway, in terms of that work programme coordination, and for this body, or it might be the chairs meeting informally to sort of look at key areas that are progressing. And I think we've discussed this morning about if we can include the deputy chairs in that, then I think that would help that process. So I'm hearing what you're saying, not necessarily in the context of planning enforcement, but I think it's a point that's been picked up earlier as well.
Yeah, Ewan.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, obviously they looked at it. I didn't realise they were looking at it, because I'd quite like to have contributed. And I think sometimes a chair looking at stuff in isolation, if you don't know what the problem is, you don't know where to look. Sometimes. But I haven't seen the report, and when it comes out, I should read it, and I may have to apologise and take all that back. But I think there certainly is an issue from my perspective. It needs looking at. I've got a really good relationship with my enforcement officer, David Hill, who I gave him a name check last month, and I'll give him another one. And lo and behold, I've got another one on at the moment. I've spoken to him about it. He's fully in agreement, and I'm sure that the planning team are fully committed, but they're doing a fabulous job of giving the impression that they couldn't care less.
No.
But what I mean? I'm sure that's not the case, but that's certainly, if I'm looking at the email thread I've got, it just looks like. And then I've got multiple emails, and we're trying to find I will get this enforced. Well, subject to things working out in May, I will get this enforcement carried out. But I'm having to work against the planners at the minute, not with.
Well, like Liz and you and I didn't listen in because I wasn't aware that it was taking place, and but the residents did, who were contributed to the exempt, and that's where I'm coming from. They felt that things are going to continue as they are now, and that was one thing we didn't want. We wanted there to be, I think we used the word less risk averse, didn't we? I think that's the word that we used. And James Wagstaff, when he was here on the customer services report last meeting, said something like, well, he boasts about how few cases they have lost when they take them, but then when you ask him how many cases, I think it's 2 last year or this year. So it illustrates that they let an awful lot go. And I'm picking up on what you said, Ewan, at one of the inquiry sessions where there was, your neighbouring authority staffs, where, people know which local authorities are, I wouldn't say soft touches, but are less likely to enforce breaches, and those which are red hot. So, I mean, for me, it's an issue that is still outstanding. All I'm saying is, I'll leave if you lot serve on co-ord next time. ask for the chair and the relevant office to give a report back as to what recommendations, what changes were agreed. And if none were agreed, that means things are going to continue as they are. And that's one thing we didn't want. So I'll leave it again, that to you.
Forgive me, but I do think that it is something that I think as part of the assets inquiry as well, I think was picked up on. I think and the chair of the relevant committee made the point, I think at the last meeting, to say that this was something that was very much on that committee's radar.
Okay, I'll shut up now and just run through the last things. Date and time of next meeting, obviously that's going to be confirmed after the local elections in May. Any call-in requests, petitions, councillors call for actions? None. Other urgent business? Yes, Ewan.
I just want to take this opportunity to say it's your last meeting, and I think it is urgent business that we urgently thank you for everything that you've done over these years. You've made it very easy for opposition councillors to get on board. I think you've asked me to second about 3 or 4 in the last couple of years of reports that you've done, and I've willingly done it. And by the things that you've done, that's then allowed the Conservative group to come in behind. I think exempt accommodation was a great example of that. We were almost competing with each other to agree, you know, and I've got to thank you for everything that you've done. Scrutiny has been a lot better for everything that you've done. Your passion and drive is shown through. And can I just thank you, and we'll miss you very much, Carl.
I will miss this more than you'll know, but like my other 2 colleagues here are standing down, you move on, and I'm sure that we'll look back on with pride and the privilege that we've had actually to represent people in this great city, and are confident that it will be in safe hands moving forward. But thank you on behalf of all of us who are standing down. Thank you very much indeed.
Consciously, the way we sat today.
Yeah, it's the has-beens versus
Full subject to May, we might all be out.
Well, who knows? Yeah, the will of the people always prevails. Okay, authority to act.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
and
you.
Good luck if you're standing, and if you're not, enjoy your retirement. Thank you, Philip.
Thanks, Scott.
I'm going on holiday to the Connect